The moment I saw those two men in fake police uniforms grabbing my 7-year-old daughter Emily's arms in our front yard, my entire world stopped. I never imagined that moving into Meadowbrook HOA community in March of 2023 would lead to the most terrifying experience of my life. My name is Barbara Henderson, and I'm a 34-year-old single mother working as a pediatric nurse at County General Hospital. After my divorce from my ex-husband Derek 2 years ago, I saved every penny to buy our modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. It wasn't the biggest property in the neighborhood, but it had a beautiful garden where Emily could play safely, and the schools were excellent. Everything seemed perfect until I met Karen. Karen lived 3 houses down in a massive 2-story colonial that she constantly reminded everyone cost over $600,000. She was in her early 50s, with bleached blonde hair kept in an aggressive bob, and she wore designer clothes even to check her mailbox. From day one, Karen made it clear she considered herself the queen of our street, even though she held no official HOA position. The problems started small but escalated quickly. Karen would leave passive-aggressive notes on my car about parking 2 inches over an imaginary line. She'd complained to other neighbors that Emily's laughter while playing in our backyard was disruptive. She even called the HOA board 3 times in 1 month, claiming my grass was 1/4 inch too tall, which wasn't even true. In July, I planted rose bushes along my front walkway. Karen marched over within an hour, claiming the color red was too aggressive for the neighborhood aesthetic and demanded I replace them with white flowers. When I politely declined, she spent the next week photographing my house from different angles, building what looked like some kind of case file against me. The harassment escalated when she started filing noise complaints about Emily playing in our backyard on Saturday afternoons. She claimed the sound of a 7-year-old girl laughing was disturbing her peace. She even tried to get the HOA to pass a rule limiting outdoor play to 30 minutes per day, which thankfully failed when other parents with children objected. Michelle told me that Karen had done similar things to the previous families. The Johnsons had teenagers who played basketball, Michelle explained. Karen called the police on them 17 times in 6 months. 17 times. For playing basketball in their own driveway, the family eventually just gave up and moved to avoid the constant harassment. But I tried to be neighborly. I baked chocolate chip cookies and brought them over as a peace offering. Karen took the cookies, looked me up and down with disgust, and said, "Store-bought would have been better," before closing the door in my face. My best friend and neighbor, Michelle Rodriguez, warned me repeatedly. "That woman has run off for families from this street in the past 6 years," Michelle told me one afternoon. "She makes their lives so miserable they just give up and leave. She's absolutely toxic. Just stay away from her." I wish I'd taken that advice more seriously. The real nightmare began on a sunny Saturday morning in April of 2024. I had just finished my night shift at the hospital and came home exhausted at 7:30. Emily had spent the night at Michelle's house for a sleepover with Michelle's daughter, Sophia. Planned to sleep for a few hours, then pick Emily up around noon for a weekly park trip. I was deep asleep when my phone started ringing aggressively at 10:30 in the morning. Groggily, I grabbed it and saw Michelle's name flashing on the screen. "Barbara. Barbara, wake up!" Michelle's voice was panicked, something I'd never heard from my usually calm friend. I sat bolt upright. "What's wrong? Is Emily okay?" "Emily's fine, but you need to get over here right now. Karen is at my front door with 2 men in police uniforms claiming Emily is in danger at your house and they need to take her into protective custody." My blood ran cold. "What?" "I'm on my way." I threw on sweatpants and a t-shirt and ran out my front door in my slippers. As I sprinted across my lawn toward Michelle's house, I could see a small crowd had gathered on the street. Karen stood on Michelle's front porch with 2 men wearing what looked like police uniforms, complete with badges and utility belts. But something was immediately wrong. The uniforms looked slightly off, the badges were too shiny and looked like costume jewelry. The patches weren't quite right with colors that didn't match any local department, and one of the men had a beer belly that strained against his shirt. The other wore sneakers instead of proper duty boots, and neither had the equipment a real officer would carry. As a nurse who regularly worked with law enforcement on child welfare cases, I knew immediately these men were frauds. Real officers have a certain bearing, a professional demeanor. These men looked nervous and kept glancing at Karen for direction. "That's her!" Karen shrieked when she saw me. She pointed at me dramatically, her face twisted with false concern. "Officers, that's the neglectful mother. You need to take the child into custody immediately for her own safety." "Excuse me." I stopped at the bottom of Michelle's porch steps, breathing hard. "What the hell is going on here?" One of the fake officers, a man in his mid-40s with a receding hairline, stepped forward and tried to sound official. "Ma'am, we've received a report of child endangerment at your residence. We need to take your daughter into protective custody while we investigate." My nurse training kicked in, and I started noticing details. Real police officers identify themselves properly. They show credentials, they call for backup. These men had done none of that. "Can I see your badges up close?" I asked calmly, though my heart was racing. "And which department are you from?" The two men exchanged nervous glances. The second one, younger with badly dyed black hair, stammered, "We're from ... the county. Child Protective Services Enforcement Division." That wasn't even a real thing. I'd worked with CPS countless times at the hospital. They don't have an enforcement division with officers in police uniforms. CPS social workers were business casual with county ID badges. Karen jumped in quickly, sensing her fake officers were failing. "Don't try to distract them with your questions. I saw everything. I saw you leaving your daughter alone in that house for hours. I saw drug paraphernalia in your garage. I saw suspicious men coming and going at all hours." My jaw dropped. Every single word was a complete lie. "Karen, I just worked a night shift at the hospital," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emily was at Michelle's house for a sleepover, which you obviously knew since you came here. There are no drugs in my house, and the only suspicious men you've seen are the lawn service I hired 2 weeks ago." Michelle opened her front door and stepped out, holding Emily's hand. My daughter looked scared and confused. "Mom, what's happening?" Emily asked in a small voice. "It's okay, sweetie," I said, climbing up 2 steps toward her. "Everything's fine." That's when one of the fake officers made his move. He reached out and grabbed Emily's other arm. "We're taking the child with us now. Let go of my daughter." I lunged forward, but the other fake officer blocked me. Michelle immediately pulled Emily back hard, stepping between my daughter and these men. "You're not taking this child anywhere. I'm a witness that Emily was safely in my care with her mother's permission." Someone called the real police. Neighbors were now recording on their phones. Mr. Patterson from across the street, a retired police sergeant, called out, "This doesn't look right. Real officers would have called for backup." "Where's your patrol car?" Mrs. Chun from 2 doors down added. "I've never seen uniforms like that." "What precinct are you from?" Karen's face turned bright red. She clearly hadn't expected this much resistance. "They have every right to take that child." I filed an official report. "That woman is dangerous." "To whom did you file this report?" I demanded. "Let's call them right now. Let's get real police officers here and sort this out." The fake officers were starting to panic. The older one's hand moved to his belt where a real officer would have a radio, but he had nothing there. That's when I noticed the younger fake officer had a phone clipped to his belt, and the screen was lit up with a text message visible. "Get the kid and get out fast. $500 cash waiting my mind." Rased, Karen had hired these people. She'd actually paid men to pretend to be officers and kidnap my daughter. "I'm calling 911 right now," I announced loudly, pulling out my phone. "If you're real officers, you won't mind real police coming to verify your credentials, right?" The 2 fake officers immediately stepped back. The older one muttered something to his partner, and they both suddenly started walking quickly toward a beat-up gray sedan parked at the curb. "Wait! Where you going?" Karen screeched. "You need to take the child." "I paid you," she stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd just said in front of everyone. The entire crowd went silent. Karen's face drained of color. "You paid them," I repeated slowly, my voice shaking with rage. "You paid fake officers to kidnap my daughter?" I didn't. "That's not... double quotes," Karen stammered, backing away. "You're twisting my words!" The fake officers jumped into their car and sped off, leaving Karen standing alone on Michelle's porch with a dozen witnesses staring at her in horror. I was already dialing 911 with shaking hands. "Yes, I need to report an attempted kidnapping and impersonating police officers. 2 men in fake uniforms just tried to take my daughter, and my neighbor, Karen Whitmore, admitted she paid them to do it." Karen's eyes went wide with panic. "I didn't admit anything." "You misheard. These people are all lying." She pointed at the crowd. "You're all against me. This is discrimination." Within 8 minutes, 2 real police cruisers arrived with lights flashing, followed shortly by a CPS supervisor I actually knew from the hospital, Linda Chun. Linda had worked with me on dozens of child welfare cases over the years. She took one look at me holding Emily protectively and immediately understood something was very wrong. A 3rd police car pulled up, and a sergeant stepped out. The crowd of neighbors had grown to nearly 20 people, all of them ready to give statements. Mrs. Kidnap, who lived 4 houses down, had recorded the entire confrontation from her window. "I got everything on video," she announced. "The fake uniforms, the grabbing, and Karen admitting she paid them. It's all right here." "Barbara, what happened?" Linda asked, professionally but kindly. I explained everything while Officer Ramirez took notes. Multiple neighbors came forward as witnesses, showing their phone recordings of the fake officers and Karen's slip-up about paying them. Mr. Patterson provided his expert opinion that the uniforms were definitely fake. Karen kept trying to talk over everyone, making wild accusations. "She's a drug dealer. She neglects her child. She's dangerous. Check her house, you'll find everything I reported." Officer Ramirez turned to Karen calmly. "Ma'am, we will absolutely check out these allegations. But first, I need you to explain why you hired 2 men to impersonate police officers." "I didn't. I thought they were real. I just called them from an ad I saw." Karen's story kept changing every 30 seconds. "What ad?" Officer Ramirez asked. "Show me." Karen fumbled with her phone, but she couldn't produce any ad because there wasn't one. She'd clearly hired these men through some shady connection. Linda spoke up. "Officer, I'm from CPS, and I know Barbara Henderson professionally. She's a pediatric nurse at County General with an impeccable record. I've never had a single complaint about her parenting. Whatever this woman reported is clearly false." Officer Ramirez nodded and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement. Filing a false report is a crime, and conspiracy to kidnap a child is a very serious felony." Karen's entire demeanor changed. The aggressive anger drained away, replaced by pure terror. "Wait, I want my lawyer. I'm not saying anything else." As Officer Ramirez read Karen her rights and placed her in handcuffs, I held Emily close, feeling her small body trembling against mine. My daughter had almost been taken from me by this hateful woman's insane vendetta. Emily was crying softly, burying her face in my shoulder. "Mommy, I was so scared," she whispered. "Those men said you were in trouble, and they had to take me away." "I know, baby. I know. But you're safe now. Mommy's here, and I'm never going to let anyone take you away from me." I kissed the top of her head repeatedly, my own hands shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and rage. Michelle put her arm around both of us. "Come inside," she said gently. "Let's get Emily some juice and cookies while they finish up out here." Officer Ramirez assured me they'd need a full statement, but I could take a few minutes to calm my daughter first. But as I watched Karen being led to the police car, still protesting and threatening lawsuits, I had no idea that this was just the beginning. Because 3 days later, While Karen was out on bail, I discovered something in my mailbox that made the attempted kidnapping look like child's play. Inside was a thick manila folder containing falsified documents with official-looking seals, documents that claimed to prove I was an unfit mother with a criminal record I'd never had, complete with forged police reports, fake psychiatric evaluations, and falsified CPS complaints. The documents were dated from 6 months ago, created long before the fake officer incident. There were photos of my house with timestamps, detailed logs of my comings and goings, and even fabricated witness statements from neighbors who claimed I neglected Emily. The level of detail was terrifying. Karen had been stalking me systematically, building an entire false case against me. My hands trembled as I flipped through page after page. She'd forged documents from County General, claiming I'd been fired for stealing medications. She'd created fake court records showing I'd lost custody battles. She'd even manufactured evidence suggesting I had a criminal history for child endangerment in another state. Karen hadn't just improvised this attack. She'd been planning to destroy my life for a very long time. And as I stood there reading through page after page of elaborate lies, each one more disturbing than the last, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should have moved when you had the chance. This is far from over." What do you think happens next? Have you ever dealt with a toxic neighbor? Share your stories in the comments below. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, surrounded by Karen's falsified documents, and realized I was staring at evidence of a conspiracy that went far deeper than I ever imagined. After finding the manila folder in my mailbox 3 days after Karen's arrest, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those fake officers grabbing Emily's arm. But now, looking at these documents, I understood that the attempted kidnapping wasn't Karen's first attack. It was supposed to be her final move in a campaign that had been running for months. The folder contained 47 pages of elaborately forged documents. They were fake police reports dated back to November of 2023, claiming I'd been investigated for child neglect. There were fabricated psychiatric evaluations, stating I had severe mental health issues and was a danger to my daughter. There were even falsified statements from County General Hospital claiming I'd been terminated for stealing controlled substances. But the most chilling part was the detailed surveillance log. Karen had documented my movements for 6 months, every time I left for work, every time Emily went to school, every visitor to my house. She'd taken hundreds of photographs of my property from different angles. She'd even recorded the license plate numbers of every car that parked in front of my house. This wasn't just harassment. This was obsession. I called Michelle at 6 in the morning. Walk in erupt. "Michelle, I need your help. Karen's been stalking me for 6 months. I have proof." Michelle was at my door in 5 minutes, still in her pajamas. When I showed her the documents, her face went pale. "Barbara, this is insane. She's been planning to destroy you, systematically. You need to call the police right now and then get a lawyer." Officer Ramirez arrived within 20 minutes. He spent an hour photographing every page of the forged documents. "Senora Henderson, this significantly strengthens the case against Ms. Whitmore. We're talking about forgery, fraud, stalking, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. She's looking at serious prison time." "But why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would she do all this? I've never done anything to her. I tried to be friendly. I just wanted to live peacefully in this neighborhood." Officer Ramirez shook his head. "In my 15 years on the force, I've seen cases like this before. Some people become fixated on perceived slights or imagined offenses. They build entire narratives in their heads where they're the victim and their target is the villain. Ms. Whitmore clearly has serious psychological issues." Later that morning, I called the lawyer that Michelle recommended, Jennifer Torres, a family law attorney who specialized in harassment and custody cases. Jennifer agreed to see me that afternoon on an emergency basis. Jennifer's office was in downtown, a 40-minute drive. I asked Michelle to watch Emily because I didn't want my daughter to hear any of this. Emily had already been through enough trauma. Jennifer Torres was a sharp, professional woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes that hardened as she reviewed Karen's documents. "This is one of the most elaborate harassment schemes I've ever seen," she said, flipping through the pages. Ms. Whitmore went to extraordinary lengths. These forgeries are sophisticated, official-looking letterheads, fake signatures, fabricated case numbers. She either paid someone who knew what they were doing, or she's frighteningly skilled herself. "What do I do?" I asked. "I'm terrified she's going to escalate. She's out on bail right now. What's stopping her from coming after me or Emily again?" Jennifer leaned forward. "First, we're filing for an emergency restraining order today. Second, we're going to contact the district attorney's office and make sure they have all this evidence. Third, we're going to document everything, every threat, every contact attempt, every violation. And fourth, we're going to sue her civilly for damages, emotional distress, and defamation." I felt a weight lift slightly. Finally, I had someone fighting for me. "How much is this going to cost?" Jennifer smiled. "With evidence this strong, I'll take it on contingency for the civil case. We're going to win, Barbara, and we're going to make sure Karen Whitmore never harasses anyone again." Over the next week, things moved quickly. Jennifer filed for the restraining order, which was granted immediately. Karen was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from me. Emily, my house, Emily's school, and my workplace. She was also ordered to have no contact whatsoever, no calls, no texts, no emails, no third-party communications. The district attorney's office was extremely interested in the forged documents. They added multiple charges to Karen's case: stalking, forgery in the first degree, fraud, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, filing false police reports, and witness intimidation. Her bail was revoked, and she was taken back into custody. I thought I could finally breathe. I thought the nightmare was ending. I was wrong. 2 weeks after Karen's rearrest, I came home from work at midnight after another exhausting shift. Emily was sleeping over at Michelle's, again something we'd been doing more frequently because I felt safer knowing Emily wasn't alone in the house. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something was wrong. My front door was slightly ajar. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I'd been obsessively checking locks since the fake officer incident. My heart started pounding. I immediately called 911 from my car. "I think someone broke into my house. I'm not going inside. I'm staying in my car until police arrive." 2 patrol cars arrived within 7 minutes. Officers swept my house with weapons drawn. After 10 tense minutes, one of the officers came back to my car. "Ma'am, you need to come inside and tell us if anything's been taken." I walked through my house with shaking legs. Nothing seemed to be missing. My TV was still there. My laptop was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. Emily's iPad was in her room. None of my jewelry was gone. But then I saw it. On my living room wall, someone had spray-painted in huge red letters, "You'll pay for this. You destroyed my life." Below the message was a photograph pinned to the wall, with a knife. It was a picture of Emily at her school playground. Someone had drawn a red X over her face. I collapsed onto my couch, unable to breathe. This was a direct threat against my daughter. Karen was in jail, but she was still reaching out to hurt us. Officer Martinez, who had responded to the call, looked grim. "Ms. Whitmore is in custody, but she could have hired someone to do this. We're going to process this as a crime scene. We'll check for fingerprints, DNA, any evidence, and we're going to have a patrol car stationed outside your house for the next 72 hours. I couldn't stay in the house that night. The officers helped me pack some clothes, and I went to Michelle's. Emily was already asleep in Sophia's room, completely unaware of what had happened. Michelle made me tea and sat with me until 3 in the morning. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said. "Actually, I insist you stay here until this is completely resolved. I'm not letting you and Emily go back to that house until Karen is behind bars for good." The next morning, I called Jennifer Torres and told her about the break-in. She was furious. "That's it. We're going after her with everything we have. This is terroristic threatening now. This is a direct threat against a child." Police forensics team found fingerprints that didn't match anyone in their database, but they found something else: security camera footage from Mr. Patterson's house across the street. His cameras covered a wide angle that included part of my driveway. Officer Ramirez called me that afternoon. "We got him. The footage shows a man breaking into your house at 11:45. We ran facial recognition and got a match. His name is Derek Sullivan, known associate of Karen Whitmore. He's her cousin. We picked him up 2 hours ago, and he's already talking. He says Karen paid him $2,000 to vandalize your house and leave that threatening message." My head was spinning. She hired her own cousin. How did she even contact him from jail? "Phone calls," Officer Ramirez explained. "She used her allowed phone calls to coordinate with family members. We're going through all her recorded jail calls now. We think there might be more we don't know about yet." That phrase haunted me. More we don't know about yet. What else had Karen planned? What other attacks were coming? The HOA board called an emergency meeting 3 days later. They wanted to discuss what they called the ongoing situation with Ms. Whitmore. I attended with Jennifer Torres by my side. The meeting was packed. Every homeowner on our street showed up, plus several from neighboring streets. The HOA president, Robert Chun, opened the meeting. "We need to address the elephant in the room. Karen Whitmore's actions have terrorized this community, endangered a child, and brought criminal activity to our neighborhood. The board has voted unanimously to begin proceedings to revoke her homeowner status and force the sale of her property." The room erupted in applause. Mr. Patterson stood up. "I want to go on record supporting Barbara and her daughter. What Karen did was inexcusable. We failed to act when she harassed previous families, and I regret that. We're not failing this time." One by one, neighbors stood up to share their own stories about Karen. Mrs. Kim talked about how Karen had filed false complaints about her fence. The Johnsons, who I thought had moved away, called in via video conference to share how Karen's harassment had forced them to leave. A total of 8 families recounted their experiences with Karen's bullying and intimidation. I stood up, my voice shaking. "I just want to say thank you." For months, I felt alone. I thought I was being too sensitive, that I should just ignore her. But what she did to my daughter trying to kidnap Emily with fake officers, that crossed every line. No one should have to live in fear in their own home. No child should be terrorized like Emily has been. The room broke into supportive applause again. Michelle squeezed my hand. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. 2 days later, the district attorney's office called. They wanted me to testify before the grand jury. Karen was being charged with 14 separate felonies, and they wanted to make sure the indictment was airtight. I testified for 3 hours, walking the grand jury through everything: the harassment, the fake officers, the forged documents, the break-in, the threats. I showed them the photograph of Emily with the red X drawn over her face. Several grand jury members looked visibly upset. The grand jury returned a true bill on all 14 charges. Karen was now officially indicted and facing up to 40 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Her lawyer reached out to Jennifer about a plea deal. Karen was willing to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. Jennifer called me to discuss it. "They're offering 10 years with possibility of parole after 7, Jennifer explained. "It's not ideal, but it guarantees she goes to prison without the risk of a trial. Trials can be unpredictable, even with strong evidence." I thought about Emily, who still had nightmares about the fake officers. I thought about the months of harassment and the terror I'd felt finding that threatening message in my house. "No deal," I said firmly. "I want her to face every single charge. I want a jury to hear what she did. She terrorized my daughter, and she tried to destroy my life. She doesn't deserve a break." Jennifer smiled. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Let's take her to trial." But 3 days before the trial was set to begin, something happened that changed everything. I received a call from Officer Ramirez at 7 in the morning. His voice was tense. "Senora Henderson, I need you to listen very carefully. We've just learned that Karen Whitmore has been using her jail phone privileges to contact more people than just her cousin. We found recordings of calls she made to what we believe is a private investigator. We think she's been having you followed and gathering more information about your daily routine." My blood ran cold. "What?" Ebim from Heil. How is that possible? She's obsessed, Officer Ramirez said. We're working on identifying this investigator now, but I wanted to warn you immediately. Please be extra vigilant. Don't deviate from your usual routines. Don't go anywhere alone. And if you see anyone following you, call 911 immediately. After hanging up, I sat frozen at Michelle's kitchen table. Karen was still coming after me, even locked up, even facing decades in prison. She was still trying to hurt me. Michelle found me there 20 minutes later, staring at my phone. Barbara, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I told her about Officer Ramirez's call. Michelle's face hardened. That's it. We're getting you a security system. Actually, we're getting you two, one for your house when you move back, and one for my house. And I'm buying you pepper spray and a personal alarm. That afternoon, while Emily was at school, Michelle and I went to a security store and spent 3 hours setting up protection measures. We bought cameras, motion sensors, door and window alarms, everything we could think of. But as we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was always one step ahead. She'd been planning this for so long. What if she had contingencies I didn't know about? What if there were more people she'd hired, more attacks she'd planned? That night, after putting Emily to bed, I was checking my email when I saw a message from an unknown sender. The subject line simply said, "You should read this." Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a single attachment, a PDF file. When I opened it, my heart stopped. It was a detailed dossier on me, Emily, Michelle, Jennifer Torres, Officer Ramirez, and even the district attorney. It contained home addresses, daily schedules, phone numbers, family, information, photographs, and detailed notes about routines and vulnerabilities. The file was dated from 3 days ago, created while Karen was in jail. At the bottom of the last page, there was a handwritten note that had been scanned. Trial starts Monday. You'll regret not taking the plea deal. I have friends everywhere. What will Barbara do with this evidence? Is Karen planning something even more sinister for the trial? Share your thoughts in the comments. The morning Karen Whitmore's trial began, I woke up at 5 in the morning with my stomach in knots, knowing that in just a few hours, I'd be face to face with the woman who tried to destroy my life. After discovering the dossier Karen had compiled on me, Emily, Michelle, and everyone involved in the case, I'd immediately forwarded it to Officer Ramirez and Jennifer Torres. The email had been traced back to a burner phone Karen had somehow smuggled into jail, another charge added to her growing list. The private investigator she'd hired was arrested within 48 hours. But that didn't ease my anxiety. Kara had proven she was capable of anything. Eben locked up, even facing decades in prison, she continued to scheme and plot. What would she try during the trial itself? Michelle made me breakfast, but I could barely eat. "You're going to do great," she assured me, squeezing my hand across the table. "Just tell the truth. The jury will see who Karen really is." Emily was staying with Michelle's mother for the week. I didn't want her anywhere near the courthouse. My daughter had been through enough trauma already. Jennifer Torres picked me up at 8 in the morning. She looked sharp and professional in her navy suit, carrying a briefcase stuffed with evidence. "Ready?" "Si," husked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, getting into her car. The courthouse was an imposing brick building downtown. As we walked through security, I saw news vans parked outside. Karen's case had attracted significant media attention. The story of a deranged HOA neighbor hiring fake officers to kidnap a child had gone viral online. The courtroom was packed. I recognized many of my neighbors: Patterson, Mrs. June, Mrs. Kim, the Johnsons, who had flown back specifically to testify. Michelle sat in the front row directly behind the prosecution table, giving me an encouraging nod. Then Karen was brought in. She looked different from the aggressive, perfectly coiffed woman I'd known. Her bleached blonde hair had grown out, showing dark roots. She wore an orange jumpsuit instead of designer clothes, but her eyes still held that same intense hatred when she looked at me. Karen smiled at me. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was cold, calculating, predatory. I felt my blood run cold. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Judge Elizabeth Morrison was a stern-looking woman in her early 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She reviewed the charges against Karen, all 14 felonies, reading them aloud, one by one. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Morrison asked. Karen's attorney, a expensive-looking lawyer named Richard Brennan, stood up. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor." The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Marcus Washington, was a tall, imposing man with a commanding presence. He began his opening statement by showing the jury the photograph of Emily with the red X drawn over her face. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Marcus began, his voice powerful, "this is not a case about a neighborhood dispute. This is not about someone who didn't like her neighbor. This is about a calculated, systematic campaign of terror against a single mother and her 7-year-old daughter. Over the next few days, you will hear evidence of stalking, forgery, conspiracy to kidnap, and terroristic threatening. You will see how the defendant, Karen Witt, spent 6 months planning to destroy Barbara Henderson's life, and when that didn't work fast enough, she hired criminals to kidnap a child." Several jurors looked visibly shocked. One woman in the back row was already shaking her head in disgust. Karen's attorney gave his opening statement next. He tried to paint Karen as the victim I concerned neighbor who genuinely believed I was neglecting Emily. He claimed the fake officers were a misunderstanding, that Karen had been deceived by con artists. He argued that the forged documents were created by someone else trying to frame Karen. It was absurd, but he delivered it with conviction. I gripped Michelle's hand tightly. What if the jury believed him? The prosecution called Officer Ramirez as their first witness. He testified about responding to the fake officer incident, about Karen's slip-up admitting she'd paid them, and about the subsequent investigation that uncovered her surveillance logs and forged documents. "In my 15 years as a police officer," Ramirez said, "I've never seen such an elaborate scheme to harass and terrorize someone." Ms. Whitmore maintained detailed logs tracking Mrs. Henderson's movements for 6 months. She forged official government documents. She hired criminals to impersonate police officers and attempt to kidnap a child. And even from jail, she continued to have Mrs. Henderson surveilled and threatened. During cross-examination, Karen's attorney tried to suggest that Officer Ramirez was biased, that he'd rushed to judgment, but Ramirez remained calm and professional, citing evidence point by evidence point. The second witness was Linda Chun, the CPS supervisor. She testified that she'd worked with me professionally for 8 years, and that there had never been a single legitimate complaint about my parenting. She also testified that the fake officers had no connection to CPS whatsoever, and that Karen's claims about a child Protective Services Enforcement Division were completely fabricated. "Mrs. Henderson is an exemplary mother," Linda stated firmly. "She's a dedicated pediatric nurse who regularly goes above and beyond for her patients." The allegations Ms. Whitmore made were not just false, they were malicious lies designed to cause harm. Then came Michelle's testimony. My best friend took the stand and described the morning the fake officers arrived at her door. She recounted how terrified Emily had been, how Karen had been directing the fake officers, and how Karen had accidentally admitted paying them. "Emily was shaking when she came to me," Michelle testified, her voice thick with emotion. She said, "The men told her that her mother was in trouble and they needed to take her away." A 7-year-old child shouldn't have to hear that. She shouldn't have to experience that kind of terror in what should be a safe neighborhood. Marcus asked Michelle to describe Karen's behavior during the confrontation. She was directing them like a conductor, Michelle sighed, telling them what to say, pointing at Barbara, orchestrating the whole thing. And when the fake officers started to panic and leave, Karen literally said, "I paid you," in front of everyone. There was no mistaking what she meant. "I've lived next door to Barbara for 3 years, Michelle continued, her voice shaking. "She's the kindest, most caring mother I've ever known. She works night shifts at the hospital saving children's lives. Then comes home exhausted and still makes time to play with Emily, help with homework, and be an amazing parent. What Karen did trying to have Emily taken away was evil. There's no other word for it. The 3rd day of trial was when I had to testify. I was so nervous I thought I might throw up as I walked to the witness stand. But once I started talking, the words flowed. I told the jury everything. The harassment that started the day I moved in. The passive-aggressive notes. The constant HOA complaints. The cookies incident. Karen's escalating behavior. I described in detail the morning I received Michelle's panicked call and ran outside to find fake officers grabbing my daughter. When I saw those men holding Emily's arms, I said, my voice breaking, I felt terror like I've never experienced. My daughter was crying. She was scared, and these criminals were trying to take her away from me. And Karen was standing there, orchestrating it all with this satisfied look on her face, like she'd won some kind of twisted game. I took a breath and continued. For weeks after that day, Emily had nightmares. She'd wake up screaming, afraid that men in uniforms were coming to take her away. She became terrified of anyone in a uniform, police officers, security guards, even the crossing guard at school. Karen didn't just attack me, she traumatized my innocent daughter. Several jurors were visibly moved. One woman was wiping tears from her eyes. Then Marcus walked me through the discovery of the forged documents, the break-in at my house, the threatening message spray-painted on my wall, and finally, the dossier Karen had compiled from jail. Senora Henderson, Marcus asked, why do you think Ms. Whitmore targeted you specifically? I looked directly at Karen for the first time since the trial began. I honestly don't know. I tried to be friendly. I never did anything to provoke her. I think she just decided she didn't want me in the neighborhood. And when I didn't leave voluntarily, she decided to destroy me. During cross-examination, Karen's attorney tried to make me seem paranoid, suggesting I'd exaggerated the harassment. But I had evidence for everything: the notes Karen left on my car, the HOA complaint forms with her signature, text messages from neighbors warning me about her, the forged documents, the surveillance photos. The attorney's questions became increasingly desperate. Isn't it true that you and Ms. Whitmore had personal conflicts over neighborhood issues? No, I replied calmly. Karen had conflicts with me. I tried repeatedly to resolve things peacefully. She responded by escalating her harassment until she literally tried to have my child kidnapped. The prosecution rested their case after 5 days of testimony. They'd presented 43 pieces of evidence, including the forged documents, surveillance logs, text messages, jail phone recordings, and testimony from 17 witnesses. Karen's defense was weak. Her attorney called character witnesses who testified that Karen was a pillar of the community, but several of them admitted under cross-examination that they'd personally witnessed her aggressive behavior toward neighbors. Then Karen's attorney made what I thought was a huge mistake. He put Karen herself on the stand. Karen took the oath and began her testimony. She denied everything, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy. She said I'd fabricated the forged documents myself to frame her. She claimed the fake officers had approached her, not the other way around, and she genuinely believed they were real police. But when Marcus cross-examined her, Karen's calm facade cracked. Senora Whitmore, Marcus asked, holding up the surveillance log, can you explain why you kept detailed records of Mrs. Henderson's movements for 6 months? I was concerned about the child's welfare, Karen replied stiffly. Concerned enough to photograph her house 347 times. Concerned enough to record the license plates of every visitor. Concerned enough to note what time she turned her lights off at night. Karen's face flushed red. I was being thorough. Thorough? Marcus's voice rose. You forged police reports. You created fake psychiatric evaluations. You manufactured an entire false criminal history for a woman who had never been arrested. Is that what you call being thorough? Those documents weren't created by me, Karen shouted, losing her composure completely. Barbara probably created them herself to frame me. She's always been jealous of me. She's jealous of my house, my status in the community, everything I've built. Jealous? Marcus looked incredulous. Mrs. Henderson, a hard-working single mother and pediatric nurse, is jealous of you? Is that why you hired your own cousin to break into her house and spray-paint threatening messages on her wall? I didn't hire anyone. Karen's voice was shrill now. Her attorney tried to object, but She kept talking. My cousin acted on his own. He was trying to help me because he could see what Barbara was doing to me. Everyone was against me. The police, the neighbors, everyone. Everyone was against you, Marcus repeated slowly, because you tried to kidnap a 7-year-old child. Karen stood up suddenly, her chair falling backward. I was trying to save that child. Barbara is unfit. She's dangerous. Someone had to do something. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Senora Widmore, sit down immediately. But Karen wasn't done. She turned and pointed directly at me, her face contorted with rage. This is all your fault. You should have moved when I told you to. You should have left when you had the chance. But you just had to stay and ruin everything. Guards rushed forward to restrain Karen as she continued screaming. I'm not done. I have friends. This isn't over. You'll pay for what you've done to me. Karen was removed from the courtroom, still screaming threats. The jury looked absolutely horrified. Karen's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Morrison called a recess. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder. Well, that just won us the case, she whispered. The next day, closing arguments were brief. Marcus didn't need to say. Mooch Corin's courtroom breakdown had said everything. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When the verdict came back, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The courtroom was completely silent as we waited for the jury foreman to speak. On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. I felt Michelle grab my hand. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder. On the charge of stalking, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of terroristic threatening, we find the defendant guilty. 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 All 14 counts. Each verdict felt like a weight lifting off my chest. Karen sat motionless as the verdicts were read, her face blank, her hands clenched into fists on the defense table. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, she turned one last time to look at me. There was no rage in her eyes anymore, just cold, calculating hatred. Michelle hugged me tight. It's over, she said. You won. Emily's safe. It's finally over. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think the nightmare was finally ending, but 3 days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked from the county jail, sent before Karen's outburst in court. Inside was a single page with handwritten text. Dear Barbara, by the time you read this, the trial will be over. You probably think you've won. You probably think you're safe now, but I've been planning this for much longer than you know. I told you I have friends everywhere. Did you really think the fake officers and my cousin were the only people I hired? There's someone else. Someone you trust. Someone close to you, and they're about to make their move. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. Okay, my hands trembled as I read the letter again. Someone I trust. Someone close to me. Who could it be? I looked around my living room. Suddenly, paranoid. Michelle? No, impossible. Officer Ramirez, Jennifer Torres, one of my neighbors. My phone rang. Making me jump was Michelle. Barbara, can you come over? I need to talk to you about something important. Something about Karen that I should have told you months ago. My blood ran cold. Michelle's voice sounded strange. Off. Not quite right. I'll be right there. Primera sighed slowly, grabbing my phone to dial 911 with my other hand as soon as I hung up. Because if Karen had taught me anything, it was that the nightmare was never really over until every single one of her schemes had been exposed. Who is Karen's inside person? Is Michelle really involved? Or is Barbara being paranoid? What secret has Michelle been keeping? Share your theories in the comments. I stood outside Michelle's door with my phone in one hand, 911 already dialed, ready to press call the moment anything seemed wrong, because Karen's letter had made one thing crystal clear: she had someone on the inside, and I couldn't trust anyone. My finger hovered over the call button as I knocked. Michelle opened the door immediately, and the look on her face told me something was seriously wrong. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked terrified. "Barbara," she said, her voice shaking. "Come in! Quickly! We need to talk before it's too late." I stepped inside cautiously, keeping my phone visible. "Michelle, what's going on?" "Karen sent me a letter saying she has someone close to me working for her." "Is that you?" Michelle's eyes widened in shock. "What? No. God, no! Barbara, how could you even think?" She stopped, taking a deep breath. "No, that's not what this is about. It's about my brother." I blinked. "Your brother? I didn't even know you had a brother." "Exactly," Michelle said, sitting down heavily on her couch. "I've been keeping him a secret for 3 years. His name is David Rodriguez. He's been in and out of legal trouble most of his life. Fraud, identity, theft, forgery. He's currently on probation for creating fake documents for a real estate scam." My stomach dropped. "Forgery? Michelle, those documents Karen had were created by my brother." Michelle finished, tears streaming down her face. "Karen found out about David somehow. She approached him 6 months ago and paid him $15,000 to create those forged documents about you. He didn't know what they were for. He just thought it was another fake ID job. But when he saw the news coverage about the trial, he recognized a name and put it together." I sat down, feeling dizzy. "Your brother created the fake police reports, the psychiatric evaluations." "All of it." Michelle nodded miserably. "He called me yesterday, panicking. He knows he's going back to prison if this comes out. But more than that, he feels terrible about what Karen used his work for. He had no idea she was trying to destroy someone's life, especially someone I care about." "Where is he now?" I asked. "Upstairs," Michelle said quietly. "He wants to turn himself in. He wants to testify against Karen." "But Barbara, I'm so sorry. I should have told you about him when you first moved in. I was ashamed. I thought if I kept him away from my life here, it wouldn't matter. I never imagined Karen would find out about him and use him like this." I looked at my best friend, seeing her genuine anguish. Michelle hadn't betrayed me. She'd just been trying to protect her family's reputation. "It's not your fault," I said finally. "Karen's the monster here. Not you or your brother. If he's willing to testify, that actually helps the case." I called Jennifer Torres immediately. Within an hour, she arrived with Officer Ramirez and a deal for David Rodriguez full immunity in exchange for his testimony against Karen and information about how she'd contacted him. David was a thin man in his late 30s, with guilt written all over his face. He showed us text messages from a burner phone Karen had used, detailing exactly what she wanted forged. He had receipts for the payments she'd made through an intermediary. He even had drafts of the documents with Karen's handwritten notes about what to include. "She told me it was for a custody case," David explained. His voice hoarse, said she was helping a friend gather evidence against an abusive mother. I should have asked more questions. I should have verified. But the money was good, and I didn't think about who might get hurt. Officer Ramirez took David's statement and then turned to me. "Mrs. Henderson, I think we might have been looking at this wrong. Yes, David created the documents. But if Karen hired him, someone had to connect them, someone who knew about Michelle's brother and also knew Karen." "What do you mean?" I asked. "How did Karen find out about David in the first place?" Officer Ramirez pressed. "Michelle said she kept him secret." "So who told Karen?" Michelle's face went pale. "Oh my God. The only person I ever told about David in this neighborhood was..." She stopped abruptly. "Who?" I demanded. "Rebecca Patterson. Mr. Patterson's wife. She and I used to have coffee together when I first moved here. Before you arrived, I confided in her about David during a weak moment. She promised she'd never tell anyone." Officer Ramirez pulled out his phone. "Rebecca Patterson. Let me check something." He made a call to the station, speaking in low tones for several minutes. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Rebecca Patterson and Karen Whitmore served together on the HOA board 4 years ago, he said. They were close friends until there was some kind of falling out. But get this, Way pulled Rebecca's phone records as part of our investigation, and she's been in regular contact with Karen even after Karen's arrest, including 3 calls in the past week. My minder said Mr. Patterson had been so supportive during the trial. He'd testified against Karen. He'd offered to help install security at my house. But his wife had been working with Karen all along. We need to bring her in for questioning, Officer Ramirez said. Right now. 2 hours later, Rebecca Patterson sat in an interrogation room at the police station. I watched through the one-way glass as Officer Ramirez questioned her. Jennifer stood beside me, taking notes. Rebecca was a petite woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled gray hair and an air of superiority that reminded me uncomfortably of Karen. At first, she denied everything, but when Officer Ramirez showed her the phone records and played recordings of her calls with Karen from the jail, her facade crumbled. Fine, Rebecca snapped. Yes, I've been helping Karen. So what? That woman deserved everything Karen did to her. Why? Officer Ramirez asked calmly. What did Barbara Henderson ever do to you? She brought down property values, Rebecca said, as if it were obvious. Single mothers attract the wrong element. Karen and I worked hard to maintain the quality of this neighborhood. We had standards, and then Barbara moved in with her daughter, working night shifts, leaving the child with babysitters. It was inappropriate. I felt sick listening to her twisted logic. This woman had helped Karen try to kidnap my daughter because she didn't think single mothers belonged in the neighborhood. What exactly did you do to help Karen? Officer Ramirez pressed. Rebecca smirked. I told Karen about Michelle's brother. I helped Karen track Barbara's schedule. I took photos of her house from my window. Karen couldn't get good angles from her place, 3 houses down. And I was supposed to help with the next phase of the plan after Karen got out. But then, you people had to interfere. Next phase? Officer Ramirez leaned forward. What was the next phase? Rebecca's smile grew wider. Karen was going to frame Barbara for a crime. We had it all planned. We were going to plant drugs in her car and call in an anonymous tip. Barbara would be arrested, lose custody of her daughter, and finally be forced out of our neighborhood where she never belonged. The casual way she described ruining my life made my blood boil. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder. We've got her, she whispered. This is conspiracy. This is accessory after the fact. This is everything we need. Rebecca Patterson was arrested and charged with conspiracy, aiding and abetting, and obstruction of justice. Mr. Patterson was devastated when he learned what his wife had done. He filed for divorce within a week. Karen's sentencing was rescheduled to include the new evidence. David Rodriguez testified, showing exactly how Karen had paid him to create the forged documents. Rebecca's confession was entered into evidence, showing the full scope of Karen's conspiracy. On the day of sentencing, I sat in the courtroom with Emily beside me. My daughter was 8 years old. Now a year had passed since the fake officers had tried to take her. She'd been through therapy and was doing better, but she still had nightmares sometimes. Judge Morrison reviewed all the evidence, the original charges, the forged documents, the break-in, the threats, and now Rebecca's testimony about the planned frame-up. When she finally spoke, her voice was hard as steel. Senora Whitmore, the judge said, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated, malicious campaign to destroy another person's life. You didn't just commit crimes, you orchestrated a conspiracy that involved multiple people and put a child in danger. You showed no remorse, even attempting to continue your harassment from jail. Karen stood motionless, her face blank. On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison. On the charge of stalking, I sentence you to 5 years to run consecutively. On forgery charges, 10 years consecutive. On terroristic threatening, 5 years consecutive. On obstruction of justice and witness intimidation, 5 years consecutive. The numbers added up in my head. 40 years total. Karen would be in her 90s before she was eligible for parole. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, I am issuing a permanent restraining order. Upon your release, if that day ever comes, you are forbidden from contacting Barbara Henderson, Emily Henderson, or any member of the Meadowbrook HOA community. You are forbidden from residing within 50 miles of this county. Do you understand? Karen's lawyer answered for her, as Karen seemed incapable of speech. As Karen was led away in handcuffs for the last time, she turned and looked directly at me, but there was no hatred in her eyes anymore. Just emptiness. She'd sacrificed everything, her freedom, her home, her reputation, all, because she couldn't accept that I had a right to live in the same neighborhood as her. Rebecca Patterson received 7 years in prison for her role in the conspiracy. David Rodriguez, who cooperated fully, received probation and community service. Jennifer Torres filed the civil lawsuit against Karen, and we won a judgment of $1.5 million. Karen's house was sold to pay the judgment. The new family who moved in were a wonderful retired couple with grandchildren who visited on weekends. They baked cookies for the whole street during the holidays. Michelle and I remained best friends. She felt terrible about her brother's involvement, but I reminded her constantly that she wasn't responsible for other people's choices. David actually turned his life around after the case, using his skills to help a nonprofit that combats fraud and identity theft. 6 months after Karen's sentencing, the Meadowbrook HOA held a community barbecue. It was the first neighborhood event in years where people actually enjoyed themselves instead of worrying about Karen's complaints. Mr. Patterson apologized to me personally. I should have known what my wife was doing, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I should have seen the signs. I'm so sorry for what you went through. You testified for me, I reminded him. You stood up when it mattered. That's what counts. Emily was playing with Sophia and the other neighborhood kids, her laughter echoing across the yard. Watching her run and play without fear, seeing her smile again, made everything worth it. Mrs. Chun approached me with a plate of food. Barbara, I want to apologize on behalf of all of us. We knew Karen was difficult, but we didn't act until it was almost too late. We let her run off for families before you, and we should have stopped her years ago. What matters is that the neighborhood stood together when it counted, I said. You all testified. You all supported me. That's what made the difference. The HOA board implemented new policies after Karen's conviction. Background checks for board members. Term limits. Procedures for addressing complaints that prevented any one person from weaponizing the HOA against others. They even brought in a mediator to help resolve conflicts peacefully. A year after the sentencing, I received a letter from the Department of Corrections. At first, my hands shook when I saw the return address, but it wasn't from Karen. It was from a prison therapist. Karen had finally agreed to participate in psychological counseling. The therapist wrote that Karen had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. She was receiving treatment and had, for the first time, acknowledged what she'd done. Ms. Whitmore asked me to convey that she understands. You will never forgive her, the letter read. But she wanted you to know that she realizes now that her actions were wrong and that you never deserved what she did to you and your daughter. She hopes that you and Emily are safe and happy. I read the letter 3 times. I didn't know if I believed Karen's change of heart. I didn't know if I ever would, but I did know that I was finally free. Free from fear, free from harassment, free to live my life in peace. I folded the letter and put it away. Then I went outside where Emily was planting flowers in our front garden, red roses, the ones Karen had once demanded I remove. They're beautiful. Sweet, eh? I said, kneeling beside her. Emily smiled up at me. Dirt on her nose. I like red, mommy. Red is brave. Yes, I agreed, hugging my daughter close. Red is brave, just like you. As we worked in the garden together, neighbors waved as they walked by. Michelle called out an invitation to dinner. Mr. Patterson offered to help with the heavier planting. The Johnsons, who had moved back to the neighborhood after Karen's conviction, stopped to chat. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. People looking out for each other, supporting each other, living together in peace. Karen had tried to destroy me because she couldn't accept that I belonged here. But in the end, her hatred had only made the community stronger. It had brought us together in ways that would never have happened otherwise. I thought about all the families Karen had driven away before me. I wished I could tell them that they had deserved to stay, that they had every right to live here, and that what happened to them wasn't their fault. But I could honor them by staying, by refusing to let fear win, by building the life here that I dreamed of when I first bought this house. That evening, as the sun set over Maple Street, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched Emily play with the neighborhood kids. Michelle joined me, sitting in the chair beside mine. "We made it," Michelle said softly. "We actually made it through." "We did," I agreed, "and we are stronger for it." Karen Whitmore had tried to break me. She'd tried to take everything from me: my home, my reputation, my daughter. She'd spent months plotting and planning, recruiting accomplices, and creating elaborate schemes. But she'd failed. Not because I was stronger than her, but because I had something she never did: a community that stood together when it mattered. Friends who had my back, neighbors who believed in doing the right thing, and most importantly, I had Emily. My brave, beautiful daughter, who deserved to grow up in a safe neighborhood where she could play freely and laugh without fear. Karen was serving 40 years in prison. Rebecca was serving 7, but I was here, on my porch, watching my daughter play, living the life I'd always wanted. Justice had been served. The nightmare was finally, truly over. And as I sat there in the warm evening air, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter and friendly neighbors, I realized something important. I had won. Thank you for following Barbara's incredible journey. Karen got the justice she deserved, and Barbara and Emily can finally live in peace. Have you ever dealt with a toxic neighbor? How did you handle it?